I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Lenape Nation, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. I ask you to join me in acknowledging that this country was founded upon the attempted genocide of Indigenous people, including those on whose land we stand today and every day. The mission of the Center for Constitutional Rights is to dismantle oppressive systems of power, including the ongoing legacies of US colonialism. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Sama. It's so great to have you back at CCR. Sama was a Bertha Justice Fellow, and we are lucky enough to have snagged her as a staff attorney. And welcome back to all of you. Oh my word, this gorgeous sight. If you could see what I'm seeing right now. Everybody together, all of you bold and beautiful people in this evening in this space. It does my heart so good, and I know it does for you too. I'm Rosemary Corbett, and I'm honored to have been serving on the Center for Constitutional Rights Board of Trustees for the last 7 years. Well, thanks for that. When I first came to CCR, I was teaching in New York in men's maximum security prisons, and I was working to get my brother back in California out of them. And when I was first introduced to CCR, I knew that I had found my home. And tonight is like a homecoming. That's what it feels like to me in this space with all of you. Thank you for coming out to our first event, our first in-person Tigerish event in 3 years, which has been too long. But tonight we are here to celebrate and to thank you, all of you, our clients, our allies, our staff, our board, fellows, interns, everyone who makes CCR what it is. And we're also here to thank our generous donors, because you are the ones who make our work possible. Thank you to the donors to the Michael Ratner Campaign for the Next Generation. Michael Ratner was a tireless social justice warrior, and he was a leader at CCR for 4 decades. After his passing, we launched the Michael Ratner Next Generation campaign to make sure that his spirit infuses the work going forward and brings up the next generation of movement lawyers. Michael Ratner presented. And thank you also to our Thelma Newman Society members who have included CCR in their estate planning. Thelma Newman was not a rich woman. She was actually the legal secretary of CCR co-founder Maurice Davis. But she left CCR an estate of over $100,000. And wow is right. And it's incredible, but it's not just the number that we focus on. We focus and honor her for the fact that she wanted to inspire others with her giving. She wanted others to join her in ensuring the future for progressive movement lawyering. So thank you to those of you in that community as well. And also to our Justice Sustainer monthly donors. Truly, you are the ones every month who we count on. You are the ones who help us plan and allocate and leverage our resources most effectively. Thank you so much. For those of you who give on a whim, we like you too. And we appreciate all of these measures of support. If you have not yet become a supporter of CCR, you still can. There are envelopes at the check-in table and in the swag we're going to give you, and you can also go online at ccrjustice.org. But tonight, as I said, is not just about celebrating our donors, crucial as you all are to what we're doing and to our family. Tonight, we are also here to collectively honor a few members of what investigative journalist Alexander Cockburn called a splendid body of Tigerish people. At CCR, we believe that if you have an activist, a lawyer, and a storyteller, you can change the world. And that is certainly true of our honorees here tonight. First, we celebrate 2 extraordinary activists, Joe Banner and Dr. Joy Banner. Thank you, yes, give it up. CCR is committed to following the lead of impacted communities, and in that, Joe and Joy are keeping us honest. These twin powerhouses have been fighting against corporate corruption and corporate power to save the lives and the land of Black people who've been living in Louisiana's river parishes for more than 2 centuries. We are so grateful to them, and we are awed by their work, as you'll hear more tonight. And we're also honoring a Tigerish lawyer this evening, CCR's dear friend, Barbara Stolly-Butts, the Executive Director of Law for Black Lives. Thank you, Barbara, for your brilliance and your limitless creativity in showing how lawyers can and should show up day in and day out in service of those who are fighting oppression. Tonight, we also honor a Tigerish storyteller, Jeffrey Robinson. Jeff is a civil rights attorney and racial justice warrior, and we honor him tonight for his efforts to use image and spoken word to, as he puts it, activate, expose, and inspire. I doubt there's many people in this house who haven't seen Jeff's documentary, Who We Are, A Chronicle of Racism in America. Thank you, Jeffrey. I think your work will outlive us all. And finally, tonight we present the very first ever Justice Takes a Fight Award to CCR client Ashley Diamond. Ashley embodies the breathtaking courage and bravery and persistence that it takes to put your life and even your body on the line. And we are so, so honored to present this award to her, though she's not here tonight. Welcome home, everyone. It is so good to be in this room with you, and it has been a long 3 years. So tonight, celebrate as being home members of this family. Celebrate, love each other, reflect, rejoice. Take this time, because tomorrow it's back to work. And tonight, for our fearless visionary lawyer and activist storyteller, fearless visionary leader, an activist, storyteller, and lawyer all wrapped up into one, Vince Warren.
Thank you, Rosemary. Hey, everybody. Hey. Come on now. I'm actually now convinced that in the last 3 years, y'all forgot how to party. You know why I know this? Because people are sitting in the front row and they don't know whether to clap or not to clap. They're not really sure. First time they're wearing shoes in a long time. And the CCR staff, I will tell you this, they are not a demure bunch. And if you've been to any of these other things, any of these events in the past, you know that I spend most of my time trying to get them to shut up in the back so y'all could hear what was happening. But they're very quiet back there. What's up, CCR fam? Yeah, maybe next year. Welcome, 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 welcome. It is so wonderful to be back with all of you in person, seeing the faces. And I was having conversations with folks that have been donors and supporters for many, many, many years. And I said, it must be really weird because you probably don't know a lot of the staff that's at CCR now. And someone said to me, you know, it doesn't matter. This is what happens in organizations, but the most important thing is that you're here and that you're doing this work. And I can tell you, yeah, that the folks on our staff and on our team are working endlessly and tirelessly, really redefining what justice looks like in this moment in a torrent of repression, right-wing madness, unfairness, structural racism, and so forth. I'm not going to do a lot of talking now because I'll be here all night. You know me, I get the spotlight after 3 years, man. You're lucky you get to go home. So what I do want to say is this, that the activist lawyer storyteller framework is not just a construct. This is actually the way that we think the work needs to happen. And this is a proven way that the work needs to happen. You have to change three things simultaneously anytime that you want to change anything. You have to change the structures that keep it in place, you have to change the behaviors that keep it in place, and you have to change the attitudes that keep it in place. And you can't do that just through the law. You can't do that just through storytelling, and you can't do that just through activism and organizing. And so pulling those things together makes us so much more powerful, where we're not really just using one particular tool, that we can actually develop the vision for the future that we deserve, that our people deserve, and to use these three elements together to be able to move us toward it. And I'm super excited about our guests this evening, because you will hear, as they discuss, how they do their part against enormous odds, against a society that tells them that they can't, that they shouldn't, that they don't belong, and they do extraordinary work. So I want to get us moving forward. So I'm very happy to introduce to you my good friend, senior staff attorney, and sometime bassist, Pamela Spees, who will introduce Joy and Joe Banner.
It is so good to be with you all tonight, and very strange, as everyone, I think we're all feeling. And partly it's strange because I've got Joe and Joy Banner here from Wallace, Louisiana, with their wonderful parents, William and Harriet Banner. And, we're usually running along River Road or walking along the levee or going to the little courthouse in Edgard, Louisiana, where they just constantly rock that place, shake that place to its foundations. And but they're here, and it's really exciting. It's one of the great privileges of my life to know these folks and to be able to honor them with you here tonight. And I did have to rely on some notes because I knew I'd get emotional. It's been a strange couple of years for all of us. And Joe and Joy, as you'll hear, got hit with a life-changing revelation in 2020 when a sort of massive they learned about a massive grain elevator that was trying to locate just hundreds of feet from their community. We'll go into that in a minute, but I'll just tell you a little bit more about Joe and Joy and the work that they're doing. Joe and Joy are the founders and directors of the Descendants Project, which is a nonprofit foundation committed to the liberation of Black descendants from the violent legacies of slavery. They're doing this in the river parishes in Louisiana, in the belly of the beast. They're on the front lines of the struggle against environmental racism in the form of heavy industry and petrochemical plants that hundreds of these facilities dot the river between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, which is often referred to as Cancer Alley. Some folks have started calling it Death Alley. And for the past year and a half, we've had the incredible honor of working with, as Rosemary said, these two powerhouses. And what I find is that in what feels like an ever-darkening world, Joy and Joe lead with light. And it's incredible to walk with them in this way. And we've all been made better from knowing and learning from and with you as we go along. I'll just tell you a little bit about the background here, but for over 200 years, their family has lived in this area, which is now known as Wallace, Louisiana. And it's a tiny, tiny hamlet on the Mississippi River in St. John the Baptist Parish. And it was originally settled by people who had been enslaved on the Whitney Plantation, which is the only plantation that sort of centers the lives of the people who were enslaved. And it's such an important site in this community. And one of the things that has happened over these, well, let me just say this. The family history is so deep. And their great-grandfather purchased land to build there. And a great uncle purchased the whole neighborhood when he was just 15, when he was 15 years old. Over time, more relatives joined, and it's a family enclave we're talking about. It's an extended, tight-knit, close community. And but starting in the 1970s, petrochemical companies, other heavy industries really started locating in these areas and buying up land of former plantations, and they were surrounded by these communities of people who had established community and homes there. And of course, we all know now what was happening, that it was killing the pecan trees, it was killing people. It has taken decades, but the environmental justice movement, really beginning in the late 80s and 90s, we're talking about a generational fight. And that generational fight is really exhibited through the experience of the Banner family, as we'll get into. But for instance, when they were 10 and 11 years old, a lot of folks have heard about the Formosa Plastics Facility, which has just been pretty much defeated in St. James Parish. Huge fight. In '92, that same company was trying to locate in Wallace, Louisiana. And it drew fierce opposition from the community. And eventually, a parish president went to prison for corruption connected to the zoning. Make a note of that. I'm going to come back to that, but in terms of what's happening now. But and ultimately, Formosa had to back out of that deal. But this zoning ordinance remained on the books. But the fight was fierce. But in the meantime, they were threatening families with expropriation, and they threatened the Banner family with expropriation. And what we learned just through the course of assembling this litigation that I'll talk about in a minute is that Joe and Joy were 11-year-old witnesses to the way this company was operating and trying to swindle families out of their homes, and it very nearly happened. And thankfully it didn't. They were able to grow up in this home that their parents made for them with family nearby and close by. And then 30 years later, what threatens is this new massive grain elevator, which would be as tall as the Statue of Liberty, less than 300 feet from where they live and from the cafe. And they were actually Facebook or live streaming from the Statue of Liberty today to make that point. But it was a shock because the company was not being transparent about what it was doing, and they had to find out about it through back channels. But they're continuing this legacy from 30 years ago. And these are generational fights, and they have the pieces that have sort of fallen into place as you compare the experiences and the insights from their parents, which has been, sort of imparted to them through this effort, has been incredible to witness. Let me just say that Dr. Joy Banner served for a time as Director of Communications of the Whitney Plantation, which, as I said, is the only museum in Louisiana that centers the lives of people who were enslaved. And Joe has worked in tourism and founded a cafe called the Fifolet Cafe, where they serve food that is based on their great-great-grandmother's recipes, and the best beignets in the whole area. And then they founded the Descendants Project, right around the time they were learning about this massive grain elevator that was looming over them. And it was not only going to just physically, the layout dwarf, and basically in this community, it was going to add to the pollution that is already there in one of the most toxic places in the country. In November, we sued the parish to stop this. And we filed this lawsuit to challenge a 30-year-old zoning ordinance on the basis that it was illegal. And as we stand here today, I'm happy to report that we've had 2 major victories. We've had a trial court and an appellate court give the green light for this case to move forward. And we are now making our way to a final judgment to invalidate this zoning ordinance, which is the one from 1992 that the company, this grain elevator company, is seeking to rely on. And I think the concern for Joe and Joy now is that we might win too fast. So trying to pace ourselves here. But one of the things I've learned in the course of working and getting to know Joe and Joy is that there are certain things you can't plan for, you just have to be ready for, and their instincts and intuition about where they need to be, like Washington, D.C. in February. I'm like, why does anybody need to be in Washington, D.C.? But they felt the need to go there and disrupt a Mardi Gras event it's a really sort of obscene event where the politicos gather, and they wanted to disrupt it, and they wanted to have meetings there. And so I told Dom Renfrey, our advocacy program manager, I was like, they feel they need to be there, there's a reason for it, so let's get them there and then just get out of the way. And sure enough, that's what happened. They got, a dozen meetings with different congressional offices. It led to a congressional delegation coming down on Juneteenth of this year with Raul Grijalva, who's the author of the Environmental Justice Act. And it's just led to a lot, and that's the learning part of this, is just let's follow their lead. And we've learned together all of the absurdities of parish government. But I think one of the things that's so remarkable is that as they're fighting to protect their community and keep it going, they're envisioning and laying the groundwork for what can come next. And that is phenomenal because it takes everything to fight these things and keep them out. And at the same time, they're holding job fairs, healthy job fairs, trainings for folks to get into the entertainment industry. It is amazing, and you can begin to see it on the horizon. It's coming, and you're helping to bring it. So let me just say, on behalf of all of us, thank you for your Tigerish fight and for the joy in the process. And that's Joy and Joe Banner, and these are their parents. So thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's definitely daunting, but also wonderful to see you all in person. My name is Meena Jagannath, and I'm a proud member of the CCR board. It is my great honor to introduce this year's Tigerish Lawyer awardee, my dear friend and beautiful movement sister, Marbury Staley Butts. Though I can definitely riff on her many virtues, I too have notes, which I will use. So in 2015, in the midst of mass uprisings and movement in the streets, sparked by the killings of Eric Garner, Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, and too many more, the Center for Constitutional Rights organized and hosted the first Law for Black Lives conference. The conference was a radical response designed to build infrastructure to support the movements for Black liberation, including the movement in St. Louis that CCR encountered in the early days of the 2014 Ferguson uprising after police murdered 18-year-old Mike Brown Jr. It represented a transformative moment, bringing together about 1,000 lawyers, law students, legal workers, and ex-jailhouse lawyers from all over the country to gather at Riverside Church, with thousands of others around the world attending virtually. CCR and its partners had a primary goal: to create a network of movement lawyers operating under a shared infrastructure to meet the needs of activists on the ground seeking transformative change. We achieved that goal with the creation of Law for Black Lives in 2016. And that promise is thriving under the visionary, radical, loving, and fearless leadership of Marbury Staley-Butts. As Executive Director of Law for Black Lives, Marbury has grown the network into a paid membership organization with more than 6,000 radical lawyers, activists, legal workers, and law students. I've seen Marbury's brilliance from up close. She has a keen policy mind and was a key driver of the development of the Vision for Black Lives, in which she spearheaded the policy demands for divestment from carceral and police systems and investment in community thriving. She still serves on the leadership team of the Movement for Black Lives policy table and is currently a member of the advisory committee of the National Bailout Collective, the group behind the Black Mamas Bailout. Marbury is a foremost thinker on prison and police abolition. Because of her relentless work, abolition is widely discussed and studied at law schools, and it is a part of the general public conversation. Her mark on the present legal discourse is undeniable. Since graduating from law school in 2013, Marbury has supported local and national organizations across the country in their policy development and advocacy. She joined the Center for Popular Democracy as a Soros Justice Fellow in fall of 2013, and her work focused on organizing and working with families affected by aggressive policing and criminal justice policies in New York City in order to develop meaningful bottom-up policy reforms. Prior to law school, Marbury graduated from Columbia University with a BA in African American History and Human Rights, and she received her master's in African Studies from Oxford University and worked in Zimbabwe, organizing communities impacted by violence, and in South Africa, teaching at Nelson Mandela's alma mater. While in law school, Marbury focused on the intersection of the criminal legal system and civil rights and gained legal experience with the Bronx Defenders, the Equal Justice Initiative, and the Prison Policy Initiative. And in addition to all of these accolades, Marbury is just the warmest, most wonderful, most brilliant person. I'm so honored to have been able to call her a friend and a colleague for the last many years. And I say with full conviction that there's no more committed freedom fighter than Marbury, no better movement builder than Marbury, no more splendid or tigerish lawyer than Marbury, and we're lucky to have her on our side. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Sarah Kunstler, and this is my sister and filmmaking partner, Emily Kunstler. And we are so happy to be here celebrating all of these wonderful honorees, but most particularly Jeffrey Robinson. The first time Emily and I heard Jeffrey speak, or Jeff, I'm going to say Jeff because that's what we call him, it changed our lives. And I know people say that all the time, this changed my life, that changed my life, this ice cream flavor changed my life, right? But that's not what I mean. What I mean is, Jeff had been traveling the country giving this lecture on the history of anti-Black racism in the US, and Emily and I got to hear it, and we had never heard someone lay it all out the way Jeff did in a chronology from the first enslaved Black people arriving on the continent to the present day. And there's something about the way Jeff laid it out that made it impossible for either of us and for many other people who've seen Jeff speak to look at the world they live in the same way. Jeff really taught us a new way of seeing. And he taught us that this history has been stolen from all of us, and that without knowing our past, we cannot begin to comprehend our present. This fit for Emily and I in, it was a big change, but it was a change that fit into how we'd been raised. Growing up, Emily and I were taught that it was our moral responsibility to stand up against racism and fight for justice, and that legacy has a lot to do with this organization, the Center for Constitutional Rights. Our parents, William Kunstler and Margaret Ratner Kunstler. Thank you. We get no credit for that, but we'll take it. Raised us with a deep commitment to social and racial justice, and we knew from a young age that commitment would dictate the course of our lives. And after we heard Jeff speak, we hoped that our path would intersect with his. And so Emily and I are filmmakers, and I'm also a lawyer. Emily is just a filmmaker. But as filmmakers, we thought this needs to be a film. And so we chased Jeff down. We were a few degrees of separation from him. And actually, the first time we heard him speak, we were too shy to wait in line to talk to him. So we had to figure out how to find him later, which was harder if we hadn't been so shy originally. But so we chased him down, and he agreed to meet with us at a Starbucks by the ACLU offices in downtown Manhattan. And yes, it was a Starbucks, an ununionized Starbucks in Lower Manhattan, and that was in April of 2017. And Emily and I got coffees, and Jeff got a hot chocolate, and then we were unsure whether it was going to work, but we still pitched the idea to him. And barely 1 year later, in June, on Juneteenth, 2018, we were in Town Hall Theater with a packed house, and Jeff was giving his talk, which turned into can I say this? The powerful documentary, which turned into the powerful documentary, Who We Are, A Chronicle of Racism in America. And we were privileged that night to have the Center for Constitutional Rights as one of our kind of founding partners in getting the event off the ground, and having Vince Warren introduce Jeff that night on stage, and earning himself an unforgettable cameo in our finished film. And I'm going to pass this on to Emily, who's not just here to look nice, standing next to me. To be here with the Center for Constitutional Rights, an organization that our father co-founded more than 50 years ago, celebrating with all of you, and with you, Jeffrey, as Jeff gets this Tigerish Storyteller Award for his dedication to justice and his groundbreaking anti-racism work, is something that we did not imagine, but it's a circumstance for which we are deeply grateful. Hi, I'm the other sister. Our father was a storyteller. He would tell a story to the jury, and he would tell the same story to the general public through his skilled use of the media. Sometimes he would even tell us a story. Jeff is the executive director of the Who We Are Project, an outgrowth of his work to challenge the dominant narrative of our nation's founding, demonstrating how slavery's legacy has led to persistent and abiding racial inequity and promoting education, discourse, and change. His goals for the project are to expose the role of anti-Black racism, the myth of white supremacy throughout the history up to the present, inspire Americans to learn and share this history, and activate the next generation of citizen historians, truth seekers, and activists. Until April 2021, Jeff was an ACLU deputy legal director
and the director of the ACLU's Trone Center for Justice and Equality, which houses the organization's work on criminal justice, racial justice, and reform issues. Since graduating from Harvard Law School in 1981, he has dedicated his life to justice. He's represented indigent clients in state and federal courts. He's tried over 200 criminal cases to verdict and has tried more than a dozen civil cases, representing plaintiffs suing corporate and government entities. Jeff was one of the original members of the John Adams Project and worked on behalf of one of the 5 men held at Guantanamo, charged with carrying out the 9/11 attacks. Sarah and I believe that creativity and art have tremendous power to spur people into action. There's so much power in the way Jeff weaves this story of our America. His Who We Are is not just a history, it fires you up. Jeff, thank you for letting us take this journey with you and for allowing us to bring your work to a wider audience. There's no one like you, and you are the embodiment of a Tigerish storyteller.
I wonder why I'm on this stage with these amazing people. How about it? So friends, it's good to see everybody. Joe, Joy, I wanted to start with you. So we had the real fortune to be able to travel together to Paris and Geneva this summer, where you got to address the UN Committee for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. And my question for you is, what's it like to be fighting these battles on a hyper-local level, you know, like the town hall meetings and the council meetings, and then to sort of zoom out to an international audience where you have to explain to everybody what's going on back home? How has that been for you? What's been the hardest part and what's been the most interesting part?
I'll let you. Well, it's sitting in Geneva and talking to the audience that we had. I couldn't help but feel just honored to be there, first of all, but also sad because I realized I had to travel, 10,000 miles, I think, more or less, in order to be heard. I couldn't even travel 15 miles in front of my own parish council, which is St. John Parish is like a county. But we have still not had an audience before them. So the gravity of that moment and how much these systems are still holding us back. But I'm very blessed at the same time to be with an organization that could provide me this access and invited us to be partners in that fight and didn't let my parish neglecting of us stop them from being there and being our advocates. So having that moment of really being able for the first time to speak out, and here I was in Geneva, Switzerland. So there was not a boudin, a gumbo in sight, right? It was cheese and chocolate all the way. But at the same time, I felt more at home in that setting than I did in my own parish. I think that's, just a wonderful experience of that moment.
Well, and it was surreal to be in Geneva and to have that large of an audience. And what stood out to me was the idea of human rights. That's not really a term that we feel connected with in these, like you said, hyperlocal communities. And with Louisiana, we love the fact that we are different, and you'll hear it, a lot of times that, well, it's just Louisiana, we do things different. And there is a cuteness and there's a novelty to it, and we like the fact that we're different. But what I realize is that part of that novelty is corruption, right? And when things happen in Louisiana, it's like, the parish president went to jail. Oh, what you gonna do? And so that's sort of our identity. And to be on the world stage and when people are saying human rights and even conversations about trauma and abuse and what I think of as trauma and abuse, and I would never, would characterize myself that way, and I still don't, but understanding the amount of abuse and the amount of trauma that we have been exposed to. So we love our culture, but then understanding that we have rights, and our rights come from the fact that we're human and we're here, and we don't have to work for it. We shouldn't have to prove it. We're here, and so we deserve human rights.
So Marbury, I'm gonna kick it to you. I know I wasn't supposed to do this, I got 15 minutes before it comes, but I'm calling on you, Ms. Marbury.
Okay.
But Joe and Joy were talking about, and as Pam mentioned, that they formulated this organization, this formation, out of the activism of the protections of themselves and their own homes and their communities. And your work has been outstanding, particularly in trying to solve the problem of how to get movement lawyers that, and there are a lot more of them now than there used to be, how to get them connected to groups that are on the ground. What do you see as some of the challenges? And we were lucky that Joe and Joy and CCR came together in a really organic way. But how do we make that happen at scale?
Yeah, well, so first of all, thank you. I'm just so excited to be here with everybody and on this stage with folks who I just have so much respect for, so thank you. And I stand for CCR, so it's always a pleasure. And this is a cold ball. I was ready for the other question, but I got this one too.
See?
I think, I don't think it's a coincidence that CCR has strong relationships with folks who are doing this work, because at the heart, I think, of movement lawyering, of the idea that we want to use legal tools in a way that actually builds the power of people, and not just our own power or our own profile, or legitimizes these systems that have killed us, that were invented in some ways to kill us. But that's really based on the backbone of relationship and respect. And so when I heard this beautiful introduction, and I'm pregnant, so I just cry about everything. But when I heard this, it was so based in knowing you and your family. And I think that at the heart of connecting movement and law is relationship. And I think about what it means to actually not be in a transactional relationship, not just be there for when the case happens and leave when it ends, but know what's for dinner at your mama's house, and what's your brown liquor preference, if it's and I think that's really the basis of how we can build together. And so I think CCR does this exquisitely, because that is enjoyable at times, and it's also really hard at times. It takes emotional labor. It requires, when people say slow down or stop, we figure out how to actually manipulate the wheels of these systems to do that, even at the expense of a quote-unquote win in a courtroom sometimes. And so I think for us, we really emphasize that the only way we can win is if we invest our power inside of movements, and we can only do that through deep relationship. And that's about being equals, and so we each bring to the table a different set of tools, but it's about following the leadership of folks who actually are at the center and know what is best and what's possible. And so I think in our work, so much of it is about relationship. And we also acknowledge that we won't stay in this fight if we don't have the relationships to sustain us. And so those are both about what we learn from each other and how we can actually work together, but also that as individuals, as lawyers, as organizers, without deep relationship, we have no chance of winning, especially when I think the darkness, the period we're in now, where it feels like all backlash and all bad news, that the only way we can sustain that is if we have each other in a deep way. So I think at the heart of CCR is this.
And Jeffrey, Jeff, because you're right, I only started calling you Jeffrey since you got big time, brother. We've been hearing a little bit about how relationships form on the ground, how people turn from being just ordinary, every manifestation of degradation and destruction and oppression, and can't get anybody to listen. They have to go halfway around the world to get people to listen. Your film, as you know, I think it's absolutely remarkable. Have people been listening? And how do we know that?
Yeah, I think people have been listening, and we have done talkbacks to groups all over the country, and that intent from the very beginning to reach as many people as possible. And I have to follow up on what Marbury said, because we needed to reach people. Nobody knew who the hell I was. I was just a criminal defense lawyer walking around. Nobody knew me. But when we went to town hall, Vince got on stage and introduced us to a New York audience. And I'm a lawyer. I'm not a filmmaker. I met Sarah and Emily Kunstler, probably the luckiest day of my life as an advocate, because they are brilliant. I am not a filmmaker. I could not have done this. So needing Sarah and Emily's help in doing this was just critically important. And the connections to CCR are just interesting. Vince, you introduced us on stage. Sarah and Emily have talked about their father and his role in establishing this organization. Dr. Ron Daniels is sitting right there, a former leader who has taught me more about the fight for reparations in America than anybody else I've ever had. And so, one of the things that I want to say is that I never dreamed that the highest learning curve I would have in my career would be in my 50s and 60s. Because I thought I already knew a whole bunch of shit. And, you know, there's a band that I'm very enamored with, a band called Arcade Fire. And they have a song that goes, I can't get my head around it. I thought I'd found it. Then I found out I don't know shit. And to learn what I learned doing this research in my 50s, despite where I grew up. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee in 1956. I didn't read about the civil rights movement. That's what I walked out my front door into. And yet there's all this information that I didn't know. I had never heard about the Whitney plantation. And then I heard about it and I thought, oh my God, the information that is here, how did I not know about this? And so I went through a period, quite frankly, of pretty significant depression because I was blaming myself. I thought, you stupid asshole, how could you not know this stuff? Where you grew up, how could you not know it? And as I finally started to forgive myself, I still needed somebody to blame, so I figured I'll blame my teachers. Why not? It's their fault for not teaching. And then I thought, well, how are they supposed to teach me if they didn't know? So, my purpose in making this film was to try and share some of the information that I found out in my 40s and 50s with the largest group in America. And when I met Sarah and Emily Kunstler, they gave me the opportunity to do that.
So I actually want to stay in the reparations frame.
Please.
I'm throwing curveballs.
Yes. Let's do that, though.
I'm a Mets fan, but I can pitch. But we have Dr. Ron Daniels here, and it is not such a shameless plug that for those of you who are fans of the Activist Files podcast, you already have heard the fantastic podcast with Dr. Ron Daniels and Marbury Stiley Butts on reparations. And for those of you who have yet to be fans, you need to download that sucker right now. And after you do that, then you should hear the one with Dr. Joy and Joe Banner about the Descendants Project. But let's talk a little bit about reparations, because I think it actually connects really deeply to all of the work that you guys are doing, even though for some of you it may not be sort of the number one framework. But you know, and I want to sort of just throw this out and sort of set it up. When I was able to visit your hometown and to see where that terrible grain elevator is going to be built right next to your house, it occurred to me that these sugar plantations that were there after slavery ended, and for folks who were able to buy, your ancestors that were able to buy the land from the slaveholders, what ended up happening was a racially capitalized rope-a-dope, where you now have this sliver of land that they're trying to take away from you, but the slave owners cashed out. And for 60 years, they sold all of the surrounding land to petrochemical companies. And so now you have a situation where you are actually fighting for your land, your family land, and it is a situation where it's gotten so bad throughout the river parishes that black people, black women in particular, are having to make this choice of saying it's too dangerous to stay, but it is more dangerous if I give up this land that my parents and my great-grandparents fought for than anything else. There's a piece around how to make that whole in the context of even the litigation that you're doing. Marbre has been doing lead thinking around the country and thinking with folks, Movement for Black Lives and other folks, about a repertory framework and what that would look like in actuality. And Jeffrey, the whole piece of your film, all the things that I didn't know, all the things that I learned, I got real angry about it. And I went through the whole thing, the 7 steps of the black man blaming himself. But where I came out was, I'm pissed off, and now that I know there is a way to make this thing right, and the question is, will people hear that? So just all of you, just on the piece around reparations, how important is it to your thinking, and what would you share with us?
Well, I have to admit, when we discuss reparations, it's such a big concept, and then it's also such a very personal concept. And so I understood that we have so many brilliant people that speak on it. But what it comes down to is, what do you see reparations to be for you and for your community? It's going to look different sometimes depending on who you ask. And for me, as a former business professor, I used to think, and I don't, I don't object to anyone who thinks about it, but I thought we should get the money. It's about, if that's what it was about money, I want money. Don't tell me that I need to put it in community resources or whatever. No, I want the money. After I was a business professor, I went immediately into my job as a director of communications at Whitney Plantation, where my ancestors were literally enslaved. And the beauty, of working at a plantation was being able to give that tour, but then we all gave it in a way, and we all gave it in a way that was close to our own experiences. And as a business professor, former business professor, giving this tour about slavery, I realized, wow, a lot of what I am now telling people about on this tour about slavery, that's exactly what I was teaching my students in business school. And it's capitalism that got us here. It's economic development. It's it's progress. It's jobs. Is that we have made this agreement that somebody has got to be sacrificed in order for us to supposedly progress as a society, right? And one of the biggest concepts that we haven't, that people misunderstand about slavery is that they think it was about black hatred. It was like, oh, they just hate black people, and so that's why they enslaved them. No, it was realized that slavery is an economic system. We need the labor. And by the way, African descendant people are brilliant. They're resourceful. They're intelligent. They do everything. And so we're going to extract that labor, right? And so it's about economics. And so talking about reparations, or understanding it, and also understanding that after emancipation, that and I read this wonderful book, Reconstruction in the Cane Fields, what formerly enslaved people wanted was land. Mm-hmm. Land was independence, land was freedom. They were very explicit about the importance of land. And so I'm like, reparations is about land for me. I trust my ancestors. They said land was independence and freedom, so that's who I'm going with.
For me, when I hear the term reparation, what I hear is liberation. Because what repairing is just to be free of all of the things that have held us back for so long, and also being free to decide what we want and to craft what we want, not following somebody else's formula of what happiness is. And I was just thinking about, like, what are we fighting for? And I realized that we have the scale where we have life and then we have livelihood. And in the river parishes of Louisiana and Cancer Alley, I think the goal of many people has to keep the two in balance, like 50-50, you get a little bit more life, you lose a little bit more livelihood, and the whole thing is to keep them even. And I realized that the two should never be on the same scale. Life should never be compared to livelihood. And that's what we have been doing. Like, we have put our lives in the river parish and other places too, and we put it on this unfair scale. And that's because someone gave us this formula that that's what life should be. And we're fighting as black people to get on that scale and to do it, and it's like, that's not our scale. Why the hell are we measuring ourselves with this when we are deeply rooted, when, as Joy said, it's land. We want our land that has been so much a part of our liberation. I mean, it's freeing to me to sit under my oak tree that we steward, that's been there for centuries. We own that land. We own that space in my community where my great aunts and uncles gather, and they have the craziest, weirdest stories about Louisiana, but it's teaching my history, right? And it's making me laugh. We talk about painful moments, but they always have a way of making us laugh and finding a joy in that. And realizing that moment, we wouldn't have it if we didn't have that oak tree that gave us comfort and breeze in a very hot, humid day. But we have those little precious moments that are freeing for me when I'm going through this work. It frees me. I'm liberated in that moment. So I think about reparation in that sense, the fact that there's a black family in Louisiana that can sit under an oak tree and just enjoy stories from generations that have been passed down to them.
Thank you. I love that. Yeah, reparations, I have to say, I think the last few years have felt in many ways difficult to sustain hope. And for me, reparations is like the North Star, where I'm like, oh, whoa, what? Like, because I think there's a moment where you're so caught up in defensiveness. How do we defend our people? How do we make sure that it can survive this moment? And reparations, I think, actually provides a pathway not just to stop the harm, but to transform the systems of harm and to repair the harm, because actually none of the policy solutions and the lawsuits get us to actual repair. And so I think for me, the last few years, and learning from Ron Daniels and Knock and Nicobra and like all of this, like literally decades and centuries of work of reparations, our ancestors' demands, has always been about, it's not enough that you stop what you're doing, you also have to assess how we got here and repair what you've done. And I think the reality is the reason why history repeats itself, especially when it comes to imperialism and colonialism and anti-blackness, is because we have yet to actually assess the systems that got us here and address them. And so it's inevitable that we recreate them, that there's nothing about the reforms that we put in place that could possibly solve for the deeply rooted ways in which these systems have failed us. And so for me, when I learned about reparations, not just as the 40 acres and a mule, although yes to that, we would take that and cash. Yes. I think it's now there's like an ACH I can give you that might speed this along. So compensation is key, but also reparations in the international framework and in the histories and traditions of our people includes things like non-repetition. You can't keep on doing the same shit and repair it. You have to stop what you're doing. That means system change. That means policy change. That means cultural change. But it also, and I think this has been the most powerful to me to both of your points, it includes a retelling of history. That we have to actually tell the real story of how we got here. Like, you can't, and this I think is the fight over quote unquote critical race theory that we're seeing, this fight over the truth and history, that if we don't name our country is built on genocide, our country is built on anti-blackness, if we don't name capitalism actually is like inherently disastrous and and is more at risk, that we actually can't move forward. And so to me, the framework of reparations is more than just compensation, but also includes this truth-telling. It also includes the guarantee of non-repetition. It includes rehabilitation. Like, we should find ways to heal each other and our people. Otherwise, we cannot move forward. Has been a source of so much light and hope. I think when we just get obsessed with either the defensiveness and winning a single lawsuit or a single policy, it's hard to imagine what we're actually fighting for. And the powers that we fight are so stronger and bigger than us, that us actually imagining a whole different world is so important. And reparations, I think, when you think about what it means to be whole, and then from that whole place, get to imagine what we want, what our children deserve, what we deserve, what our ancestors deserved, it allows us, I think, to fight another day in a really important way. And so for me, reparations has literally been, I've been like, okay, we're gonna get this, it'll be okay. Because I think it opens up a new range of possibilities that just doesn't exist without it.
I'm finding it hard to follow these three women. I did not have one thought about reparations when I was doing the 3-hour presentation on the history of anti-Black racism in America. I was trying to tell a history story. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I'm not a filmmaker. What I was trained to do is that if you are given an incredibly complicated set of facts, put it into a timeline to see if it helps you understand it. So I approached this like a criminal defense lawyer, trying to figure out what this case was about. And when I started putting these facts in a timeline, the top of my head blew off. You could name this film The Case for Reparations, because that's what our history does. Our history makes the case for reparations. And, you know, I go back to 1865. Everybody has been talking about land, and rightfully so. In January of 1865, General Sherman was in Atlanta getting ready to march across Georgia to the sea. And he met with 20 freed Black men in secret. And they had a discussion about what newly freed enslaved people would need to be successful. And like all human beings, when we think we're doing something important, we write shit down. They're like recording this stuff tonight because somebody thinks this is important. When we had a constitutional convention, people wrote stuff down because they thought they were doing something important. And so these people wrote stuff down about that meeting. And what Sherman asked in question number 3 was, what do you need to make it in America? And Garrison Frazier, a 67-year-old minister, says, we need land. And we're going to work it with the old men, the women, and the children. Because the young men are going to go into service for the government. Garrison Frazier's speech was probably the most patriotic thing that I have ever heard in my entire freaking life, because what reason did he have to be loyal to the United States of America in 1865? Yes. And yet he was saying, we want to be part of this country because we helped build it. And so give us land. Let us work it until we can own it on our own. Whenever you are talking about land, and this is something that I think is very important because land has to be part of the reparations discussion. We have to understand that if we are talking about redistributing land, we're talking about redistributing stolen property, because none of us owned this land. There were people here when every one of our ancestors arrived here, and they were the ones who were on this land. So what reparations does in that sense is to give us the opportunity to expand this discussion, to expand the way we're thinking about justice. And once again, you know, Marbury said it, I have to say, I got to go back to Dr. Daniels and the National African American Reparations Commission and the Kichi Taifa. These two people worked with me when I was at the ACLU to get that entire organization at the national level for the first time in their history to endorse H.R. 40. It was a huge event. And the words that I was speaking inside that organization about reparations, I was getting from Dr. Daniels and the Kichi Taifa, because they were educating me. I told you that I'm on this thing where my learning curve is like going like this in my 50s and 60s. And so all of us may think we understand these problems, and we don't know everything. We haven't understood every layer, and immersing yourself in this will lead you to the conclusions that these three women have talked about in terms of the importance of land, and talked about in terms of this is where we can come together in community to give each other strength. Because I know how frickin' tired I am, and if I'm this tired, I have no idea what these three women are feeling. So this is the way that we gain strength and power, is from each other, coming together and having these discussions, going out into the community and having these discussions. We made this movie for a reason. People say, who was your target audience? And my response is, everybody in America. No, you have to have a narrower audience. No, I don't. Everybody in America, because everybody needs to know the truth about our history. I am not naive enough to think that simply telling the truth about our history will change everyone's minds, but it'll change some. I guarantee you it'll change some, and it will put other people in cognitive dissonance, where they're saying, oh shit, I didn't know this before. Now, what do I do with it? Now that I know it, what do I do with it? Because I'm not comfortable with what this fact tells me about our history. And that's the moment that people will do something that they haven't done before. So we are in, I think, a critical point in American history. And if you are wondering whether you should be active at this point right now, the thing that I'm dealing with is I got younger relatives. I got a son who was 13 when I made this film, and he's 25 now. And I've got I don't even know what to call her. I think it's a great niece. It's the daughter of my niece who's 5 years old, and she calls me Poobah because I told her I was the grand Poobah, and she believes me. When she's 15, she's going to be asking me, so what did you do to improve the world that I'm living in? How come I have less rights than my mother and my grandmother? What did you do to make this change? And I want to have an answer for that question. Marbury's about to bring somebody into the world. I guarantee you that child's going to be asking her, what did you do to make my life and my opportunities better? And if we are asking ourselves that question constantly, not with ourselves in mind, but with our children and our grandchildren in mind, then when we are tired, when we are frustrated, we are still going to find a way to get up and do the next step, because this is a game of inches. It's a game of inches, and every freaking inch matters. An inch can be the difference between winning and losing, between life and death, between accomplishing a goal and not accomplishing a goal. And if we are about collecting those inches, at the end of that measurement, we're going to be in a place that's radically different than we are now.
So I'm going to ask my colleague Chinyere Ezie to come up and give the award for our sister Ashley Diamond. And as she comes up, please join me in thanking this wonderful, wonderful group of folks. Jeff, you just we need the microphone. Do you have the microphone? Yes. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
I'm just messing up all over the place.
Evening wouldn't be complete without a little bit of a tech issue. But so glad to be in this space with such an incredible audience, such incredible honorees. I'm here to introduce you to a client, a friend, and a teacher who I was really hoping that you would be able to meet yourself this evening, and that's Ashley Diamond, an incredible individual and a CCR client who is this year's inaugural honoree for as a trailblazing client of our organization. Unfortunately, Ashley is and remains really enthralled in the system of mass incarceration and state supervision, and that's why she's not here today. I've learned a lot through my years of working with Ashley, and part of that learning has been about the arbitrariness of state power as it's wielded against people who we call convicts, against people who we've criminalized for their survival, like Ashley. For those of you who have not had the privilege of meeting Ashley Diamond before or learning about her story, Ashley is a Black trans woman who was born and raised in rural Georgia, a community called Rome, where growing up trans, she experienced homelessness. She was pushed out of school because of anti-trans bullying and harassment that she experienced. She attempted suicide because she didn't know that there was a community of people who would embrace her for exactly who she is. And she also experienced rampant forms of discrimination that I've come to describe and understand as the discrimination to incarceration pipeline. So after years of applying for jobs and being turned away, being told that she was perpetrating a fraud for interviewing and appearing as the woman that she is at job interviews, when her driver's license outed her or identified her as a member of the transgender community, Ashley Diamond was incarcerated in Georgia beginning in 2012 and charged with burglary, sentenced for 12 years in prison for, get this, pawning a saw that was later found to be stolen. That's how we value Black trans lives. During the time that Ashley Diamond has been behind bars, which was from 2012 to 2015, and more recently from 2019 until 2022, August 2022, Ashley Diamond has been a tireless advocate for the rights of incarcerated people behind bars, including members of the transgender community. There is an incarceration crisis impacting Black trans people and trans people of color because of the ways that we have allowed trans people to exist at the margins of society without opportunities for economic employment, economic opportunity, educational opportunity, because of all these vicious ways that we've allowed discrimination to thrive. And unfortunately, that's a theme that continues in 2022 all too often. And so Ashley has brought not one, but two incredible and powerful and courageous lawsuits against her jailers, the people who have stolen her freedom in Georgia, and also allowed her to serve a sentence that has been marred by rape, that has been marred by being forced to, in essence, detransition, and being forced to live without the medically necessary care that she requires as a trans woman. She is an incredible teacher. She's an incredible advocate. Her first lawsuit resulted in landmark changes at the time to the way that the Georgia Department of Corrections did things in Georgia. It led to so many people behind bars getting access to things like hormone therapy for the first time. But when Ashley was reincarcerated in 2019 for, again, because her experience as also a teacher, not for committing a new criminal offense, but for traveling out of state to access gender-affirming care from providers who would actually recognize her and treat her with dignity as a transgender person. That was sufficient for her to lose her freedom once again and have her 12-year sentence reinstated. this incarceration has been one where she's been trying to finish the work. And that has been challenging the ways that Georgia, while it continues to give people access to hormone therapy, will, content to treat them like men in men's prisons. In Ashley's case, like a bearded lady. She wasn't able to access hair removal or things that she really needed to just feel okay in her body. She also was placed in men's prisons where, no one had any plan, any hope of keeping her safe. These are the things that she's fighting for. I wish she was here to accept this award on her own behalf. Please continue to follow our work. We just learned on Friday that we are going to trial in Macon, Georgia, a jury trial that will be commencing in January 2023. We hope to have whatever vindication that forum allows of Ashley Diamond's claims about the state failing to protect her, failing to provide her medically necessary care. And we're going to try to make this funky constitution do what it should for people like Ashley. And I'm so glad to again be filled with in a room full of advocates who are committed and share Ashley's commitment to making meaning of this document and the promise that it has for all of us. Thank you so much.
I'm just going to close this out. Thank you so much, Chinyere, and for bringing Ashley into the room. We have a sister that has been plagued by cages people trying to put her in cages all of her life, metaphorical, physical, and otherwise. I wanted just to take this moment to close us out with the resonance of what we have here today. In the past, CCR, we've talked a lot about our cases and our projects and things like that. And over the years, we've shifted to really try to bring together the community and the brilliance in our community that animates the work of CCR. And I promise you, as inspired as you are right now from hearing these wonderful people, we, the staff, are 1,000 times more inspired. And we're lucky because we get to work with these guys every single day. Every single day. We learn from them, we partner with them. We actually laugh more than we cry with them, but we do our fair share of crying as well, especially me. But Jeff said that if there was ever a time to act, the time is now. And the time is now. And there are very specific ways in which you can act. The Descendants Project is an extraordinary organization that is only just getting started. You heard them, that they're winning too fast, right? They're trying to slow it down. DescendantsProject.org, look them up, follow them on Instagram. They have a dope Instagram feed. There are lots of actions that are happening. Tell people about them, help support them. Law for Black Lives is an extraordinary organization that I am very proud to be on the advisory board of. We didn't talk so much about their work. We talked more about Marbray's brilliance, but that's also a big part of their work. They are holding down the entire infrastructure of Black movement lawyering in the United States. So when something pops off, when somebody gets shot, when there's an action, and you guys are like, wow, look at all those people that are on the street. Do you ever wonder who the lawyers were? Organized by Law for Black Lives. And plus, they're not just trying to react, they're actually trying to build infrastructure. So check them out, lawforblacklives.org, extraordinary work. Now, I know you all aren't gonna tell me that you haven't seen Who We Are yet, those of you that haven't seen it. So I'm not gonna call you out, but I can kind of tell by the way your pupils are dilating. If you have not seen this film, you must immediately corner the Kunstler sisters before they leave the building. Where can I see this? How can I show this? How can I bring people to this? Netflix. It's coming out on Netflix. Is it out on Netflix now?
It's out. It came out on Juneteenth.
It came out on Juneteenth. So y'all need to watch that and then have listening parties and watching parties, and then so you're just not giving Netflix all the money, that you're actually building. It's an extraordinary, extraordinary film. Another way that you can help, in the way that those of you that are supporters already do, we so appreciate all of your time, all of your energy. I get phone calls all the time from you. What are you all doing about this? Can I help with that? Can I connect you to this? I mean, this is an active community in which you as our funders are a big part of the work that we're doing. And I want to put a pin in one thing before we go, because I don't know if you caught it. Chinyere Ezie said that we're scheduled to go to trial on Ashley Diamond's case. You heard that? Yeah. Okay. So for the lawyers in the room, when you think the trial is supposed to start in April, but the minute before November, they tell you that the trial is going to start in 2 months. This is a big, big trial. And it is important for us to be able to pull together all of the resources that we can to be able to do this sister proud, as Chinyere said, to try to wrest from this funky constitution anything that we can that will serve the dignity and the freedom that she and other people in her situation need. So please, as you think about us as we get to Christmas, what I want you to be thinking about is not just, wow, how much more time do I have to give to CCR before the end of the year? I want you to be thinking, we are one day closer to that trial. Yeah. Any support that we can get from you, additional support than what you're already giving, would be greatly appreciated, and it will all go to the defense of Ashley Diamond if that's what you want. Anyway, thank you all so much for coming tonight. It is great to see you all in person. I believe we can now be as we were and finish up the wine, and I will come through if there are questions. Thank you very much, and thank you guys.